Hi everyone, we are now in week 7 of distance learning. Last week I taught you about percents and I posted a slightly longer video that was kind of like a whole introductory lesson to what percent is. So I'm going to briefly review that and then I'm going to explain how to calculate percent. Then you'll be able to go do your quizzes. So let's review. The word percent means per 100. Cent is a word that literally means 100. Like centimeter, there's 100 centimeters in a meter. So it's a rate per 100. And we know that the word per tells us that we're talking about fractions. So this is some amount per 100, some fraction out of 100. Percent is a way to describe a part out of whole, which I just said is a fraction of an amount. We can write percent as a rate per 100, which is a fraction out of 100, just like what I showed you up here. For example, 30% equals 30 per 100, 30%, or 30 divided by 100, 30 out of 100. There are many different ways that someone might say this fraction. Therefore, what fraction is equivalent to 100%? Well, that would be 100%, 100 per 100. Well, 100 divided by 100 is 1. So what fraction is equivalent to 100%? 1. And yeah, we know that's also 1 over 1, but it is just the number 1. All right, let's continue. We can also write our fractions as decimals. So since we know that fractions can be written as decimals, we can write percents as decimals. For example, since 30% is 30 per 100, 30 out of 100, this is 30 hundredths. And 30 hundredths is the decimal number 0.30. Therefore, what decimal number is equivalent to 100%? Well, as we said on the previous slide, 100% is 100 per 100, which is the number 1, or 1.00. 100 hundredths. This is 100 hundredths because our last decimal place is the hundredths place. We have 100 of them to get 1. Okay, so how do we calculate percent? Percent is a fraction, and therefore we can write it as the part per whole and use that part per whole to write a percentage. So look at this example problem. Students at NIMS Middle School are selling tickets for a special event. Ishman volunteered to sell 20 tickets. He sold 16 of them. He wants to know what percent of the tickets he sold. So he volunteered to sell 20 tickets, that's our whole, and he sold 16 of them, so that's the part. So if we were to write this situation as a fraction expressed as part per whole, then Ishman sold 16 out of 20 tickets. Well, we know percent can be easily determined if our denominator is 100. So you might ask yourself, if Ishman sells 16 out of 20 tickets, how many would he sell out of 100? And I'm going to use a variable. Remember, x is a variable, and variables are unknown numbers. So we don't know how many tickets he would sell if he were to sell 100, but if we keep the rate the same, we could figure it out. So what would you multiply 20 by to get an equivalent fraction with a denominator of 100? Well, I know that 20 times 5 is 100, so I'm going to multiply by 5 to get 100. And in order to keep my fractions equivalent, because I want them to be the same rate, I want to solve for what percent 16 out of 20 represents. So I'm going to keep my fraction equivalent by multiplying the numerator by the same thing. Well, I don't know what 16 times 5 is, so I'm going to set it up over here. 5 times 6 is 30. Put a 0, carry my 3. 5 times 1 is 5. 5 plus 3 is 8. So 16 times 5 is 80, and therefore x equals 80. So what this tells me is that the fraction 16 out of 20 tickets is equivalent to 80 tickets out of 100 tickets, which means that Ishman sold 80% of his tickets. Now I'm going to show you a similar situation to explain the other method you can use to find percent. As we said, percent can be written as a fraction where you have your part out of your whole or your part per whole. Fractions can also be written as decimals, so we can do the same kind of thing but slightly different method. Here's our next example. Students at NIMS Middle School are selling tickets for a special event. Zay volunteered to sell 30 tickets and he sold 24 of them. He wants to know what percent of tickets he sold. So this time, Zay, his whole was 30 tickets, and he sold 24 of them. So if we write a fraction as our part out of our whole, he sold 24 out of 30 tickets. And maybe our first idea is to figure out if we can write an equivalent fraction with a denominator of 100. Well, 100 is not divisible by 30. Multiples of 30 are 30, 60, 90, 120, and so on. So 30 doesn't go into 100 evenly. What that means is we might find something to multiply 30 by to get 100, but it might take a little bit more work. So we can do a different method instead. Fractions can also be written as decimals. So in order to write this fraction as a decimal, we need to use our knowledge of division. 24 per 30, 24 out of 30 tickets is equivalent to 24 divided by 30. So we're going to set up long division. 30 does not go into 24. It's a bigger number, so I'm going to put a 0, and then I'm going to put my decimal point. Down here, I'm going to add a 0. 30 does go into 240. Let's see, multiples of 30. 30, 60, 90, 120, 150, 180, 210, 240. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Goes into 248 times. 240 minus 240 is 0. Therefore, 24 divided by 30 is the decimal number 8/10, or we could say 80 hundredths. Well, 80 hundredths is the rate per 100, 80 per 100, which is 80%. 80 per 100. So in this case, it wasn't easy for us to multiply our original denominator to get 100, so instead we could divide to get a decimal number and find our percentage. So 80 hundredths is 0.80, and we can multiply by 100 to get our percent. Let's review the methods real quick. The method A was to write equivalent fractions. So this is really great if 100 is divisible by the whole. So if whatever number you're dealing with, in this case, Ishman volunteered to sell 20 tickets, 100 is divisible by 20. So you can write your fraction, your part per whole, then write an equivalent fraction by multiplying the numerator and denominator to get a new denominator of 100. Let me add that right here, a new denominator of 100. And then your numerator is the percent. So if you have x out of 100, then that means you have x percent. All right, method B, so what we did with Zay selling the tickets, we can write a fraction as a decimal. So this is a great method if 100 is not divisible by the whole. So in that example, the whole was 30 tickets that Zay volunteered to sell, and 100 is not divisible by 30. So it made more sense to try method B. Step 1, we start by writing our fraction as a part per whole. Step 2, divide the part by the whole using long division, or sometimes like if you're at the grocery store or something like that, maybe you're going to use your calculator, your phone. But we divide to get a decimal number. This is the crucial part. And then we can multiply the decimal number by 100 to get the percent. So for example, the last one, Zay, was 0.80, so 80 hundredths. 80 hundredths is 80 out of 100. We can multiply by 100 and get 80. Or we can just multiply this by 100 and we'll get 80%. So we could just have some number times 100. Both of these methods will always work if you're trying to find a percent. All right, so coming up in the next video, I'm going to explain how to find the percent of a number. So for example, if you saw a problem or had a situation that was like 40% of the 15 sixth graders at the party made a TikTok. How many of the sixth graders made a TikTok? Well, we're going to figure out how many made a TikTok in the next video. I hope this video helped you understand how to calculate percents. Please go ahead and complete the quizzes on calculating percents. That is your first assignment for this week. And remember to always make the rest of your day the best of your day. I love you guys. Bye.